Hello and welcome to the Bee Formless Flow Driven CEO podcast, where we are reshaping life, leadership and business from the inside out. And today I'm welcoming a fellow Aussie again to the show, and it is the bright and colourful. We've both got our rainbow colours coming on. There's a reason for this. I love that shirt. Welcome to the show, Allan Turner.
Good morning, Bree.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm pretty good for a Tuesday morning. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Like I said, I'm pretty good for a Tuesday. I'm all the better for having you on the show. We met quite a few weeks ago, and I just want to call out that anyone, and I'm not calling out ages because, I'm 48 too, anyone can learn how to use tech. And Allan, I'm so proud of you because what started off when we were meant to record the other week, has been quite the mission, and you did it, and it's quite incredible. And like, I had a similar situation with tech yesterday, and when you persevere and when you stick at it, you get there. And there's something in that, isn't there, in terms of just persevering and continuing, because you have such a beautiful mission and legacy that you've had for quite like how many years now? Like
21 years now, Bree.
21 years. Goodness. Wow. So listeners, hello to everybody. This is going to probably be one of the most profound conversations I've had in a very long time. I've never had a conversation like this with Allan. And when I met Allan pre the record for the pod, and we jumped on a call, it'll have to be like in 2 months ago. It was like this. It was like the universe put us in front of each other, and it was like we had this kind of almost like this instant connection. And you told me your story, and then I told you a bit of my story, and I was like, whoa. So here we are. So Allan, are you ready? Are you ready to have the conversation?
Let's do it, Bree. Let's do it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So Allan, you're based out in Shepparton, and which is probably like a 4-hour drive from Melbourne, and you are the managing director of Zaidee's Rainbow Foundation, and so hence all the bright colours. We're doing this for beautiful Zaidee. And Allan, you and your wife Kim never expected your lives to become a national movement, and it did somewhat 21 years ago. In December 2004, your beautiful daughter Zaidee Rose Alexander, who was 7 years of age, passed away suddenly at just 7 years. I just said that. Following a cerebral aneurysm. And in the midst of that unimaginable grief, Zaidee became one of Australia's youngest organ and tissue donors, fulfilling wishes she had expressed during her short life. How beautiful. Through her gift, the lives of 7 people were saved and or profoundly improved. And what emerged that would shape everything that followed was, rather than allowing the loss to become the end of the story, yourself, Allan and Kim, chose to transform it into a legacy of hope, awareness and action. It's hard to even imagine you lose your 7-year-old daughter, and here you are thinking about how do you leave that legacy. On the 1st of November 2005, you founded Zaidee's Rainbow Foundation, and that was determined that Zaidee's generosity would continue creating impact long after her life ended. Since then, the foundation has inspired conversations about organ and tissue donation across Australia, helping families understand the life-changing impact donation can have for those waiting for a transplant. Through the foundation's iconic Zaidee's rainbow shoelaces, I'm sure you've got a pair of those shoelaces. Oh, I can see them behind me in the footy shoes. Yes. Oh my gosh, there she is. How beautiful. They're worn by elite athletes, sporting clubs, schools and communities across Australia. Zaidee's message has reached millions of people and sparked countless family discussions about donation, legacy and saving lives. And the shoelaces have become a nationally recognised symbol of awareness and support. For more than a decade, Allan and Kim have also championed Zaidee's law, advocating for Australia to explore an opt-out donor system, similar to many of the world's highest-performing donation countries. And yet Australia currently operates as an opt-in system and sits behind countries such as Spain, France, Belgium, Portugal, Croatia, and United Kingdom in deceased organ donor rates. And so, Allan, you and your Kim, from what I understand, you continue to advocate for greater awareness, discussion and policy consideration aimed at increasing donation opportunities and saving more lives. The journey you and Kim have been on, and also your son, reflects a profound shape shift, and that is from personal tragedy to national impact, and from grief to a living legacy that continues to save and improve lives every day. At the heart of your work sits a simple belief: one conversation today could save a life tomorrow. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Ellen, because it's a beautiful, it's such an unimaginable, sad story, but it's such a beautiful story and such a gift. And I know because I've had an organ donation. I said I've had a corneal transplant, and I'm so grateful for that because it enables me to see.
It's one of those things, Bree, that you don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be an organ and tissue donor today. It's one of those things that you never think that your daughter at the age of 7 is going to die. The last thing that a parent would ever think. But when Zaidee was 6.5 years of age, she turned to mum one day and said, Mum, if anything happened to me, I think I'd like to be a donor to another kid. And Kim wrote that down in a memory book, thinking not much about it. 7 months later, we carried out her wish. Um, she died suddenly, and we thought, what can we do? And on memory of her saying that, we said to the hospital at the time that we're an organ and tissue donor family, and Zadie's wish was to donate her organs and tissues. Never to think that imaginable that it would ever happen. You're in this surreal situation in a hospital that's 2:30 in the middle of the night, and the doctor comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, "Sadly, we've operated on your daughter, but there's nothing more we can do. She's going to die." And I just fell to pieces. But my strong wife uh, turned to the hospital and said, "Yeah, this is what we're going to do, and this is what it's going to happen." And it did. We never thought that would ever be in this situation. No one ever does. You don't wake up and think this is what the day is going to be. But from that, from sheer grief and tragedy, has come a massive story in Zadie's memory, and what the foundation's done over the last 21 years has just been an incredible journey. The things that we've done, the places we've been, the inspiration that we've been putting in the community, it's just been amazing. And the stories that we can tell, it's just incredible that it came from a death of a 7-year-old girl that has given more in death than she'd ever given in life, and that is to save or improve the other 7 other lives.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? You
Yeah.
know, it gives me goosebumps when you tell that story in terms of just the fact she said to Kim, your wife, Mum, at 6.5 years of age, if anything ever happens to me, I want to donate my organs. Like at 6.5, how do you even know that? Like you're a little child, like
Mm.
there's not a worry or care in the world. And it's almost like for me, there's just this like universal or something angelic about that in terms of it was like she was sharing a gift and something in her was like preparing for what was to like. I mean, I'm not preparing's the wrong word, and I'm
Yeah,
choosing
yeah,
to be very
yeah.
careful with my words. But you sometimes hear these stories where you're like, how would you even like, yeah, and just to think a little 6.5-year-old, and then Kim just at the hospital makes just that decision that she makes.
Yeah, look, it's one of those spooky things that, one thing occurs and then the other thing happens. And I guess when I go to schools and present to parents, I always say that our kids, no matter how old they are, especially young kids, they sit in the back of the car, they hear the radio, they sit in the lounge room, they watch the TV, they hear the news. They may not comment, they may not think too much about it. When they're walking down the street, they hear people talking. So children absorb so much in their short lifetime.
Mm.
And something must have clicked in Zadie's memory that says, well, this is what I want to going to do. I'm going to donate it if I ever die. And when we think about children, we think that some of the things that they say, where they come from and how they get the understanding is no one's got a book on that one.
No.
And when she did say that, we didn't think too much of it. But 7 months later, um, it happened, and the worst nightmare that a parent can ever have is to lose a child, and very sudden too.
Mm. So, Ellen, if it's okay if I ask you, I mean, am I allowed to ask? Is it okay if I ask
Well,
you? Yeah, I wanted to check that because it's obviously a very sensitive topic, and 21 years later, no doubt still as raw as ever at times.
yeah,
You
yeah.
lose Zadie you lose Zaidee in December of 2004. And here we are a year later, just not even a year later, like 11 months later, and you've formed this Zadie's Rainbow Foundation. Like, tell us a little bit about that period because I no
Yeah.
doubt there was a lot of shock, and you've obviously donated Zadie's organs, and there's probably a lot that goes on with that as well, and wondering where they've gone and all of that, and then here you are setting up this foundation.
It
I've
probably
got
started only about 7 days after Zaidee died when we got back to Shepparton and the phone rang. It was the hospital, the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, said that, by the way, Zaidee is the only child this year to be an organ and tissue donor in our hospital. And that really sparked us off. And even that night of waiting for her to go in for a final operation, we said to the hospital, how do children get recognised about being an organ and tissue donor here in the hospital in Victoria? And no one had an idea. No one had an answer to our question. And we thought, well, maybe we can come up with an idea. And basically, Zadie had these rainbow shoelaces in her baby shoes, and these were hand-me-downs by a big brother. And it just sparked an idea to say, well, why don't we get some rainbow laces and get sporting teams to wear the laces to promote the campaign? Maybe I'll go back to Shepparton and sell a few thousand pairs and get the conversation happening. And that statistic about being the only child to be an organ donor really hit home, and I started to investigate, getting on the computer, working out, what is the subject? What is happening in Australia? What are the major campaigns? And I couldn't find any. The only campaign I really found was a guy called David Hooks, a cricketer who actually had a
Yeah.
kin hit the concrete outside a pub in St Kilda and then donated his organ and tissues, and that was probably one of the most high profile cases. And we contacted the foundation. I said, look, we don't do this, we don't do that. Then I contacted an organisation called Donate Australia, which was our leading body at the time. And I said, look, I want to come and help. How can I help? And they said, well, we don't do anything this way. We can't give you a heads up on how you can start a campaign. So I guess through Zadie's Rainbow Shoelaces, we started talking to sporting teams and working out how we can go about it. We thought we'd sell a few thousand pairs. And then in March the following year, or February, March the following year, we were on the Enough Rope, Andrew Denton's show, Enough Rope on Channel 2. And he was telling our story and it was very emotional. And Andrew said, oh, what do you want to do? I said, oh, I want to go back to Shepparton and sell a few thousand pairs of laces. And we get back and all of a sudden the phone started ringing. People wanting to make
Mhm.
inquiries about how they can help and how they can support. And one thing led to another, and I got on the phone to the Athlete's Foot. I said, "Can I sell some laces in your shops around Shepparton and Melbourne?" And they turned around and they said, "Oh no, look, we can't do that. We're a national organisation. We'll have to sell them nationally in all our stores." So what started off with a few thousand pairs of laces to end up being the first 6 months we sold 14,500 pairs within weeks, because we then end up getting on all the national TV shows, radio shows, newspapers about Zadie's story and her statistic and what organ and tissue donation was all about. So it just steamrolled from one thing to another. And then we thought, well, how do we set up a charity? We would wish the normal family in Shepparton, nothing special about the Turners, 2 kids, a dog, living in a normal house. Um, and then I guess the statistic and the story just blew out of proportion, and all of a sudden we were talking to people that sort of led us the way of how way to go about it. We then spoke to a government department in Canberra and said, "Look, I'd like to set up a charity. Can we get any funding?" And ironically, we got onto this one bloke in a bureaucratic department in Canberra on probably the 7th floor in a concrete building, and he turned around and said, "There, I'm happy to help. How can we go about it?" I said, "What do I need to do?" He said, "Put an application in." And we got funding from the federal government in 2006 to turn me into a full-time CEO
That's
and a
incredible.
full-time charity. And that was the start of it back in 2006, where it was full-time, it was full ball, where before that I was working part-time, casually, working full-time in another job, trying to get the message out there. And then, you know, I guess thinking that we're gonna sell, a couple thousand pairs of laces, 21 years on, we've either sold or given away over 2 million pairs
Gosh, it's
of
huge.
Zadie's rainbow shoelaces to the wider community right around Australia, and that was through sport. And the idea of getting 2 AFL teams to wear the laces in a game down at Geelong, back in
Wasn't Collingwood
2000.
one of them? Wasn't Collingwood one of them? My
No,
team?
no, not that. It was Melbourne and Geelong at the time that wore the laces, not Collingwood. Uh, but we had a board member at the time called Craig Kelly who used to
That's
play for
right.
Collingwood,
Yeah, that's right.
and Craig sort of helped us get the 2 AFL teams together. And ironic is the word. Ironic is there's 2 AFL teams playing for awareness about organ and tissue donation. And Tom Lonigan went back into the pack and
Yeah.
collided. He lost a kidney out of that, and here we are talking about promoting organ and tissue donation. Here's a bloke who's just lost one, and then he became our first ambassador after 3 weeks, and he was a fantastic role model and ambassador for us, and went on to play over 200 games of Geelong with only one kidney.
Mm.
So the storyline there is that, you can survive on one kidney and have a healthy and full life. But getting back to how it all started was that, um, we just it just steamrolled. It was one team, then the next team, and then I got on the phone to the Cricket Australia, and they started, and then netball, and then uh, it just went on and on. Every sporting team wanted to get behind it. So I guess 21 years on, we've had nearly every elite sporting team and every code wear the laces right down to the grassroots level. And, I think getting the message out there about how a 7-year-old girl can change a subject, can change the
Yeah.
discussion point of what we don't normally talk about, it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, it's incredible and such a gift, such a legacy. And are they Zadie's little shoes, actual shoes?
Yeah, yeah.
And
They
the
were her they were her big brother's shoes, and now he's 6'1". He wouldn't even fit his big toe in it, but they were hand-me-downs. And, they weren't the original rainbow laces, but we had rainbow laces in there, and
oh my, it's
they
just
were the tiny shoes.
so
And,
cute.
I guess that's where the thought come from, is that every sporting player needs laces in their shoes. Velcro hasn't taken over the world just yet, and we thought maybe we'd get a couple of teams to wear the laces, and is, incredible they all do. And every sporting person, the day they put the laces in the shoes is the day they'll never forget, because not often they actually change the laces in their boots or runners or whatever. And when they do, they then come up with the subject about talking about organ and tissue donation.
Mm.
And I guess since then, we've probably had countless families then allow their loved one to become an organ and tissue donor off the
Yeah.
back of Zadie's story.
Let's talk about that, Alan, because it's interesting, this opt-in versus opt-out, and it's a law that you have, been so diligently pushing forward and trying to get over the line, and yet here we are in a situation where we're effectively behind a lot of other countries in the world, and you shared those stats with me recently, and where we sit against some of the bigger, or not bigger, but where like this opt-in versus opt-out. And for me, it makes complete sense to be an opt-out versus an opt-in, because again, like it feels just like a no-brainer, and yet there's still so much that is, I guess, education, from an education perspective, and we'll get your thoughts on that. Why is it that we're still in this situation today where we are in this opt-in? Like, what is preventing us, as from an Australian government perspective, from changing it to an opt-out?
Yeah, look, good question, Bea. I think it comes down to history and culture. I think that a lot of people in the system, the health system, said, "Well, if it's not broken, let's not do anything about it." But the system is broken, and they're not prepared to put their hand up and say. I mean, when you're looking around the world, that we sit around about 21 in the world when it comes to organ donation, but probably 19 countries above us work in the opt-out system, and you go, "Why is that?" Because the current system of you signing a form and registering as an organ donor uh, just never has worked in Australia. Only one third of Australians are registered.
Mm.
So when
Is
you
that the
look at the
current stat, Alan? One third of
yeah,
Australians.
yeah, only one third.
Crazy.
So it's less than probably 7 million people are registered, to be organ and tissue donors. So what happened around the world is that they thought, well, instead of people actually registering, why don't we make it a law that instead of registering, you're perceived to be an organ and tissue donor if you die in the right circumstances in our hospital. And then we'll ask you the question whether you do or don't, rather than everybody registering and signing up. Now, in Australia, 95+% people support organ and tissue donation, but only 1/3 are registering. And it's a bit like the government saying, this is what we want you to do. And whenever the government tells you, we want you to do this, people go, no, I'm not doing what you tell me what to do, but I'm happy to donate, but I'm not happy to register because the whole 2.5 minutes it takes to register seems to be a big burden on people. And people in the age group of say 19 to 29 are bulletproof and they go, well, nothing's going to happen to me. I'm not going to die. I don't need to register. So people have this mentality thinking it's never going to happen to them. People have this mentality, I'll never have need an organ and tissue transplant. But I think when you look around the world and people go, well, we've tried everything. We've tried the registration. We've tried to get this, but it never has worked. But what happens is that in countries that do change from an opt-in to an opt-out, um, only 20% or less than 20%, maybe in some cases 10% of the people say, no, I don't want to be a donor. Or do the figures around the other way. That means either 80 or 90% of the people say, yes, I will.
So they opted.
And
Yeah, it's
so
that's where. Oh, sorry.
they've opted, yeah, they've opted out of or opted in. So it's a case that which would you rather have? 1/3 of the country support it, or 80 or 90% of the country support it. So that's the difference between asking people to register and those that are just perceived to be a donor at the end of life. And Spain, who has twice the amount of donations that we do, have been doing it for decades. And there's other things that help them along the way. But at the same time, they started off to say that we want an opt-out system, not an opt-in.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that, we've tried for the last 10 years and got nowhere. I think government officials are scared to change the law, scared that they might upset a few other people in the community about, dictating to them. I don't see it as a
Oh
dictation
God, no.
of the law. I think it's one of those things that we need to give it a crack because at the moment the registration is not building the donations that we need to
Well,
save more
it's
lives.
it's actually it's like it's archaic. It's such an old system, and we're in this. When it kind of blows my mind a little bit in terms of like you called out the 19 to 29-year-old age group, and that they think that nothing's ever going to happen to me. They feel like the lowest hanging fruit though, because they're all around purpose and you're understanding this more in terms of how do we make impact, how do we ensure that we are like, like I guess where I'm going with this also is that there's a waiting list for organ donors. Like when you're looking, like I give you a corneal transplant example, and this. Like I waited for I had to go on a waiting list, and it was critical that I got I had to get a corneal transplant. And I think you mentioned to me the other week it's changed now. You don't need to go on a waiting list anymore. But I went on one for like a good 2 or 3 months waiting for that.
Yeah.
And so this is the other part for me, is that with this opt in versus opt out, is that also then causing half like this waiting period as well, because we have a lack of donors based on the statistics, like, because it feels like that's part of the tension. And if we reversed it around, would equate to also less waiting periods and waiting time? Like,
Yeah, look, I think you've got to look around the world, and I think there's statistics there that prove that the opt-out system has worked. There's, like England, for example, and Scotland and Wales, they took about 18 months, 2 years to actually do a community campaign to educate the community of the reasons why they're going for the opt-out system.
mm,
And after that, the community supported it. I think back in the day when you were waiting for your cornea transplant, B, you know, a lot of people weren't donating, but now a lot more people are donating. So for someone that dies and donates the corneas, two people benefit because you can't get two transplants in one go. You're only going to get one eye at a time. In most cases, people only need one cornea transplant. For example, still today, we've got 1,900 people waiting for a transplant. out of that 1,900, the statistic will say that 1 in 5 will die waiting for a transplant.
1 in 5.
1 in 5 will die. Now, the government won't throw out a statistic to say that, but you talk to the ones in the know and you talk to the medical staff, and people do die waiting because they don't get a chance to get a transplant. If you needed a kidney transplant, the wait list at the moment is about 7 years. And even then, it could be blown out longer because you've got to find the perfect match. And that is a hard thing. So when you got probably three-quarters of those on the waiting list wanting a transplant for a kidney, it's high pressure that if someone dies, that those 2 kidneys, or if not just that one donation, is in high demand. And I think the more that we talk about it, the more it easy is for the community to understand the need to be a donor at the end of life, because there's nothing much more you can do when you die. You're dead. But what you can do in life, as that is proven, is to save or improve others. And when Zaidee died, she donated both the corneas to 2 4-year-old children. She donated both the kidneys to a middle-aged mum who was on dialysis for 6 years. She donated a liver to an 8-year-old girl, and she donated 3 parts of a heart to 2 infants and a newborn that needed emergency heart operations. So 7 people benefit from Zadie's gifts, and if we didn't do that, maybe that 8-year-old girl would have died, and maybe that mum
Uh,
would not have got through waiting for the transplant for her kidneys.
so
You know,
Alan, tell us a little bit about, that the rawest moment of your life, when you're told by the doctor that your daughter's not gonna make it through, and Kim has the strength to turn around and say to, the doctors and the nurses that you would like to donate, Zadie's organs. How how much has that also changed, like that, 21 years ago versus now? What and again, I'm just wanting to check that it's okay to ask you these questions because
yeah, sure.
like, is what like with this, because of this opt-in campaign and it's not an opt-out, like, what is the I hate even using the word process or procedure at end of life. Is there a conversation that's had in the hospital
Yeah.
asking, and has that changed at all since when Zaidee passed away? Has that conversation changed at all, like, to, I get to
Yeah, I know what you're saying, B. So back in the day, go back 21 years ago, that when we were told that Zaidee is going to die, and we were waiting for her to go in for a final operation, they then called in what's called a donor coordinator.
mm,
And back in the day, there was very few donor coordinators in hospitals, so we had to wait a couple of hours for her to be called in. I mean, this was in the middle of the night. Had to be called in. Uh, she sat us down. We had to fill out a number of forms. She had to discuss a number of things. She had to ask a lot of questions about Zadie's history and Zadie's past. When Zadie was on life support, waiting for her operation, they took 20 vials of blood out of her body, and they were about the size of your little finger. And it took nearly 2 hours to get those blood samples out. So they had to go and test all these different things for her to be eligible to be a donor. And in that period of time, we had to fill out forms and be told what's going on and all that. So our minds were just racing like anything, because there's there's no education out there on explaining to people in the community what happens at the end of life and how the
no,
donor coordinator comes in. And we fought fairly hard to sort of say, how can we get that education out there? And still there is none today to tell the
none
community.
today.
No communication done on how the end of life proceeds. You might find something on a bit of paper written down somewhere, but there's no major campaign out there, no school education campaign out there. So when the donor coordinator came in, there would have only been maybe 2 or 3 in Victoria. Now we've probably got about 15 to 20 donor coordinators in Victoria, so that's increased dramatically. And the trigger points in hospital was that when Zaidee died, no one tapped us on the shoulder and said, "Have you considered organ tissue donation?" I guess, firstly, my wife jumped ahead and said, "This is what we're going to do." But if we didn't say that, I don't think anyone in that hospital would have talked about have you thought about organ donation? Because it's a hard thing to talk about. Now, in 2004, to give you some perspective, that year, 103 children died in the hospital along with Zaidee. But a few were in a situation to be a donor and they went through a process, but in the end, they said no. But we carried it all the way through and said yes. And she was the only child that year to be a donor, only one of 6 children nationally. Uh, to give you perspective as well, nationally that year, about 1,700 other children died around the country for all different reasons and all different things. But we only end up with 6 children to be organ donors. And now that statistics improved a little bit, but it hasn't blown out of content. And the reason why is that we just parents don't have that discussion about death and dying in the family. Um, Before we come on the chat, you spoke about your little friend who lost a mother, and prior to that, she probably never thought about death and dying. We should educate our children. We go to primary schools all the time and talk about Zadie's story, and with that, it's part of death and dying. Kids get death and dying.
They
It's
do.
it's the parents that
They do.
so how do I handle the subject? And I guess what we did is that back in 2005, the government in their wisdom, decided to have children under the age of 16 not to become organ and tissue donor registered. And they took them off the data. And then we come up with an idea of Zadie's Kids Donor Card. And on the back of that, we get the child to fill out the forms and the parents to fill out the form and have that conversation. It's an easy conversation about, what if you're in a situation as Zadie was, would you be an organ and tissue donor? And I go to a primary school and there'd be 500 kids in front of me. And at the end, I say, who thinks organ and tissue donation is a good thing? 500 kids put up their
Well, that's
hand.
exactly right. And they're not conditioned. Like at that age, they're still able. They're not conditioned into you should do this or you shouldn't do that. So, is there just with the children? Like, is there a law? There is a law that they don't get to make a choice under the age of 16. Is that right?
That's right. So parents have to give consent for
Okay.
children under the age of 16. If you are 16 and 17, you can sign the form, but that's only with parent consent. And then 18 is when you become an official adult that you don't need parent consent. But you can still be an organ and tissue donor even if you're not registered and so forth. But it's a bit ludicrous because if children can't register to be an organ and tissue donor, then in a way they work in the opt-out system because they're not signing a form, and it's a parent that's making the decision on them becoming a donor at the end of life. So in a way, children work in the opt-out system, but us adults,
And
we don't have the privilege.
You're right, actually. I hadn't thought about it that way. And so has it changed in the hospitals to this very day, Alan? Like if
So the trigger points in hospital. Good question, B. The trigger points in hospital now have changed considerably. So, if a person comes into the ICU and they could possibly be in a situation of dying, then a number of buttons are pushed, and a number of people get involved in the discussion with the family about hypothetically, if this person does not make it through ICU, have you considered organ and tissue donation as a soft introduction to organ and donation? No longer is the doctor involved. They have donor coordinators or other specialists in hospital that might have that conversation with the parent or the family about what happens in death. And you've got to be a step ahead because if someone dies on life support, they've only got really 24 hours window to actually come
yeah,
in, uh, have that operation, and become an organ and tissue donor whilst the organs start to deteriorate
mm,
dramatically. So there is a window that in the past was probably never triggered as far as a high profile discussion point, but now and thankfully, the system in the hospitals improved dramatically over the last 20 years, that they don't miss too many people that are in a situation of dying on life support, that they don't have a conversation about organ and tissue donation. So that's improved, but yet 10 people go into hospital, 10 people die on life support. How many people at the end of the day become donors? 4. So out of that 10 people, 4. And out of those 6 people that say no, there's a whole array of different reasons why, is because all of a sudden you're faced with a decision at 3:30 in the middle of the night that your loved one's not gonna die and they're gonna come out of hospital. Can you allow us to go through organ donation? So the family have this discussion, and some say yes, some say no, and a lot of people just can't face the mentality of saying yes and the confrontation, the con con
Confrontation. I know what you're trying to say there.
confrontation that family members may have between each other because they've never had the conversation before.
So
You
you're
know, the
saying, like, if we opened up this conversation and normalized it, and rather than having to, at a really the most insane and intense period of your life where you're losing a loved one, like in the situation that you've had, like if we were able to have more conversations and normalize, this conversation around death and donating and what that can mean for the gift that your child or as an adult that you can provide, it makes such a difference. Alan, do you also think there's part of this where parents and, loved ones, is there a barrier to thinking, I don't want my child's organs or, my loved one's organs to go to somebody else? It's too weird for me that their organs could be in somebody else's body, for example. Like, and again, I say this because some people, when I tell them I've had a cornea transplant, they look at me like, what? And I'm like, and I joke, like, and I don't know whether I should, and you might roll your eyes at me, but I go, yeah, I've got
Yeah.
someone's dead person's cornea. And they're like, how do you feel about that? And I said, well, I am so grateful because I can see I didn't have a choice. Like, it wasn't a choice. I just did it because that's what I needed. Like, is there that part to this as well, where there is this lack of understanding of education?
Yeah, definitely, Brie. I think it's one of those things that, we don't normally talk about death and dying in a family, at any time. Maybe when someone gets a bit sick and ill, you start to have that conversation, but you gotta have it beforehand, and as we did with Zaidee beforehand, never to think it would happen 7 months after we had the conversation.
Mhm.
But what I say to, the community is that just imagine it was your child that needed a transplant tomorrow. How do you convince that person in that hospital that have just lost a child to donate their heart or their lungs or their kidneys to yours to save their life? How do you go about that conversation? So you will never do that. You'll never have that conversation with the person in the room next door to you. But in the community, you should have it with each other
Mm.
to say, this is what my wishes are. And we're more than happy for people to have the conversation and say, no, I don't support organ donation. It's not going to happen. Fine. You've had the conversation, you know their wishes. But generally speaking, most people will say yes because they can then put themselves in that position
Yeah,
of
losing.
what if it was me that needed a transplant? Um, you know, parents don't want to talk to their kids about death and dying because they don't want to think about it. We never did. We never thought about it, but it happened. It's reality. It happens all the time. Just watch the news every night. There's tragedy out there. I mean, you never think it's going to happen to you. We never think it was going to happen to us, but we are the story. We are the reality. It does happen, and it's always that other person. It's always that other suburb.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about it. It's never gonna happen to me, everything's good, and then lo and behold.
But in statistics will say that you've got more of a statistical chance of needing a transplant than you'll ever have giving one. So,
Needing
thankfully for that,
versus giving, right.
thankfully for that family, that brave family that allowed their family member to donate a cornea to you, has improved your life incredibly. And there's no way you can actually wrap your arms around them and thank them. But no doubt you thank them every day. And
Yeah, I
as
do.
those that do get a transplant, thank their person because if it wasn't for them, but we need more Zadies. We need more people out there that at the end of life say yes to transplant,
Mm,
no.
yeah. Gosh, I've got a couple of last questions for you. I feel like I could talk to you about this for hours just because it's so critical. The medical the medical industry, are they all for this opt-out campaign? Like, is it purely down to government not
Yeah,
wanting
it's a
to
good
change
question.
the
It's a good question. I
legislation.
think I
Yeah,
I think the old you know, the discussions I've had in the sector over the years is that the old school doctors, they don't like change. You
no.
know, they don't like to get up one day and say, "Well, I'm wearing white coats for the last 20 years, now you want me to wear a blue one?" I ain't about that. So changing the system has got a lot to do with the medical staff to get behind it, to say to government, "This is what we should be doing." And there's a lot of people inside the hospitals that support it, especially nurses and others that see it at the raw end where people do die and don't donate. And then they go down the corridor and they see someone wanting a
Waiting.
transplant, waiting, and they could have had the perfect opportunity of saving that person's life or getting them out of hospital and getting them back into the community. I think the government are a bit skeptical about, you know, do they make this change and is it good or bad? They need to. They need to change it because the way that we're going at the moment, it's not doing anything for the 1,900 people waiting for a transplant. And you look around the world and some
Doesn't
countries say
want.
has worked, it doesn't work, but you got to give it a crack. The way we're going at the moment, we're not doubling the donation rate year upon year. It's just not happening.
And so if nothing changes, nothing changes. Do you know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
we need to change this, and we need to be like that. Here we are in this world full of AI and everything that's going on, and we've got a new generation of leaders and really wanting to make a difference. And here's a huge opportunity to do something good and do something profound because it becomes I was about to say win-win, but it's not a win-win. I mean, it's a gift. Like, like you could have opted not to donate Zadie's organs instead. I mean, of course, you'd have your daughter back in a heartbeat. Absolutely, right? You don't get that choice though. It's that choice has been taken away from you. So knowing that she has helped all these people, she's donated 7 parts of her organs is truly remarkable, and I almost feel like she's in this conversation with us right now. I just felt this warmth of energy, and I just feel like
I think she's
she
around there, Boo. She's around there, and
yeah, I just
I
get
think
a really nice feeling, and she's saying, "Come on, let's like, what are we waiting for here? Like, why are we still doing it the way we've always done it?" Like,
I
yeah.
think every family that's gone through our journey will turn around and say how proud we are to make that decision, how proud we are of our loved one that did what they did at the end of life, and that's to save or improve someone else's life. Because you never do it while you're alive. I mean, you're never going to walk down the street and save someone's life, but in death you could save up to uh, 10 people through organ transplants, up to 50 people through improve lives of 50 people through tissue transplants.
Mm.
So it's mind-boggling what a body can do at the end of life than what we can do is walking down the street every day.
So what
So
can we start to do, Alan? Like in terms of final question for you, what can we second last question? Sorry, I've got one after this. What can we do? Like, how can we start to rally this into becoming a conversation with the government again? Because I know that you've been fighting the good fight and battling this out and championed Zadie's law for many years and 21 years, and well, no one's getting any younger here, and you've dedicated your whole life to Zaidee, you and Kim have, and your son in terms of championing what you're championing. What can we do? Like what do we need to do? Where does it start? Do we yeah.
first step is to have the conversation around a dinner table about the whole family and say, look, if you're in a situation as 80 was at the end of life, would you be an organ and tissue donor and get an answer, yes or no? That's a starting point. The next point is say, what can you do in the community, your local community, to get others to rally around it? Whether we get sporting teams to wear the laces, or we get cricket teams to use the cricket bat grip. The list goes on what merchandise we can promote to get it out in the community. The third is to write to your, people say write to your local politician and get their view, and say we strongly support this, and we want your feedback on what you do and what you would support. And 95% of the people do. I mean, the government are bipartisan about the supporting of organ and tissue donation, but no one's brave enough to change the law. It will happen eventually. I can see it. I know it. I can feel it. Our 10 years has been a hard struggle, but I think at the end of the day, they'll have to do something down the track, and whether I'm still here to see it or not, I don't know, but it will happen. And I think the power of the community, as we see in the past, has a great influence on the direction of what laws happen in Australia, whether it be the gun rule, gun law, whether it be equal opportunity law. It's the community that makes those decisions and
Mm.
change. We just got to get convinced the politicians that they've got to give it a go and have a crack. But start with a conversation tonight with your child, your wife, your husband, your brother and sister, and say, "Hey, would you be a donor if you died and saved someone else's life?" And I guarantee you, pretty much 95% people would say yes.
Yeah.
And the other 5% of the people, I say all the time, let me take you to the Royal Children's Hospital and walk through the dialysis room where we'll have 12 kids in lounge chairs having dialysis, waiting for a kidney transplant. Walk in one door, walk out the other, and then ask the same question. Would you be an organ tissue donor? Watching those kids sit there for hours after hours having blood transfusions, um, waiting for their kidney transplant. It's one of those things that you got to hit home hard. You've got to give them the
You
raw
do,
fact.
you do. It's a shock. It's you do. You have to. It's the only way to change the behavior, right? Like, absolutely. And I think that this is the time, we need to be making changes. And it is an interesting time, right? There's this whole freedom of speech, and there's a lot of power plays changing, and it just feels like we need to get rid of this opt-in and get into this opt-out. It just makes so much sense, and I'd like to think this happens way sooner than later. And if there's anything I can be doing to championing this with you and the audience here, it is having that conversation, talking to the right people. If you know someone in government, if you know someone in the medical world that is very high up and can actually get into the room and have those conversations, let's do it, because Zaidee has given such a gift, and so has so many other people. And so we need to fly the rainbow shoelaces and the rainbows, because what a beautiful gift.
And but
Finally, yeah,
I think, people say you're a charity, you're a non for profit, how much money can we give you to help? It's never ever been about money. It's money can't buy a transplant. You can't go in a hospital and say, "Here's my $10, I need a transplant," or $100,000, I need a transplant. Money helps to get the awareness and the campaign out there, and allows me to do what I need to do to buy uh, merchandise and so forth. But it's the power of the people just talking about it
yeah,
is what's going to make the difference.
agree.
Um, so yeah,
You just beat me. That's going to be my final question to you. Although, where do we purchase the Zadie shoelaces from? How do we get a hold of them? How do we get a hold of
just
the cricket bat?
just
All the
get on our
different.
website. Just get on our website, which is zaidee.org. Go to the shop. You can order them through there. It's the only place we've got them for sale at the moment is through the shop. But just Google Zaidee, and you'll find a whole array of different subjects about what we've done and how we go about it. But if there's anyone out there that's got a sporting team that wants to wear the laces or the cricket bat grip, get in contact with us, and that is the starting point of getting the community involved.
Yeah,
So when you got 20 footballers out there running around with shoelaces in, the discussion happens and starts, and also think, what if it was me that needed a transplant? How do I promote it out there, and how do I save myself, my own life, or my child's life,
absolutely.
as Zadie did with others?
What a beautiful story. Thank you so much, Alan. Gosh, we'll have to get you back on again, and we're gonna keep flying the rainbows. Thank you so much, Alan. Beautiful.
Thank
And
you, Bree.
again, just to reinforce to all the listeners that are listening to this, that you do have a choice. You have a choice right now to become an organ donor. It doesn't take long to register. What did you say? 2 minutes, Alan? Is that how long it takes?
Pretty much, pretty much.
2 minutes. How often do we spend 2 minutes scrolling on social media or doing things that, take up stupid time, versus this is such an important thing. And just think about what you're doing and the gift you're giving, because you just never know. And so On that note, Alan, I'm sending you so much love. I hope we get to meet in person sooner rather than later. It's
We
been
will be. We'll get
yeah,
down to your way sooner or later, and,
yeah,
we'll
yeah.
wear a nice rainbow gear and have a nice coffee down on the beach.
Totally, and we need to get the Craig Kellys of the world back on board and we need to get the Collingwood Football Club wearing the rainbow laces. That'd be amazing, given that I'm a Collingwood supporter. Alan,
It
thank you
could
so
happen.
much, and I just want to say
Thank you, V.
a special big shout out to Zaidee. What a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous. Yes, like I said, I just got that little flutter on me again. I don't know. I've got this weird sixth sense, and here she is. And Zaidee, thank you so much for all that you've done. You're not here. You are here though, and I can feel it. So thank you, Alan.
Thanks, V. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Cheers.